Hello, it's Howard Rheingold. I first became interested in the idea of personal computers and networks in which documents would be linked together long before either the World Wide Web or the personal computer were available, because I had read a book I found, an interesting outsized self-published book called Computer Lib by a visionary fellow by the name of Ted Nelson. This was several years before microprocessors became available. When they did, I found my way to Xerox PARC, and I found out about Doug Engelbart, a person who had really invented most of everything we use today. A lot of people call him the father of the mouse, which he co-created with Bill English, but really his team at Stanford Research Institute created much of what we use today, using display screens instead of printouts, hypertext, a term that Ted Nelson had invented years ago, splitting video and computer screens, outliners, even the idea of using screens to edit text. All of that came out of Doug Engelbart's laboratory. And in 1968, he pretty much turned the computer industry on its head with what's called the mother of all demos. If you haven't seen it, go to YouTube and search on the mother of all demos. So I became very excited when I read Doug Engelbart's paper. It was written in 1962. I read it in the early 1980s. It's still worth reading, about augmenting human intellect. Here was a person who far long before anybody really had invented computers that enabled individuals to think with, had a vision of using computer technology as a way to solve problems and extend our mental capabilities. I became very interested and met Engelbart. I wrote a book called Tools for Thought, in which I had interviewed both Ted Nelson and Doug Engelbart. And although we haven't seen a lot of each other in recent years, I'm proud to say that I've maintained friendships with both Ted and his wife Marlene, and Doug and his wife Karen, and had the great privilege of entertaining both couples with my wife Judy and I at our house in the San Francisco Bay Area. And although it's not a great historical document, I thought I would share a little bit of that evening with you, simply because these are such really warm, wonderful people today, even though they invented pretty much everything geeks use many decades ago. It's a little bit like having Galileo and Newton over for dinner.
It's a miracle of technology.
The World Wide Web.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. The World Wide Web is not technology, it's packaging. Just Microsoft Word, Microsoft is packaging, Microsoft Windows is packaging, the Macintosh is packaging, the web is packaging, Facebook is packaging. In all of these, some techie has decided what you can see, how you can see it, how you can get at it, and what the conventions are going to be. Whereas the real technologies are things like TCP/IP, text display, image compression, and so on. But the myth of technology that the public has swallowed is that all of these are technology, and therefore they cannot question or challenge them. And so they have this choice of conventions, this choice of conventional packages, which to me is atrocious.
Boy, am I impressed.
So, Doug, I have a question for you as well. I want to get back to that, Ted. Doug, I want to ask you if, let's say, I don't know, 1950, you would have had a time machine and you would see all the things that are happening today. What would be the most pleasant surprise?
That's a great question.
Sitting here with this marvelous group of people, this marvelous environment, peacefully, That's beyond expectation.
How do you feel about the web, Doug?
Oh, I sort of don't have much interaction actually with it, but I sort of feel elated about how it's gotten into the world and helped connect the world together.
But it doesn't really contribute to your idea of collective, improving the collective intelligence, does it? Or does it, do you think?
Well, in effect, there is a new, different collective IQ in the world because of the web. And yes, but whether or not that's as good a collective IQ as I'd like to see,
Yeah.
that's a very different question.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to see something a lot more alive.
And
About-
focused, maybe.
Yeah, alive about what people can be and what humanity can be. And, anyway, it's a dream I had about the world coming alive with humanity becoming, we can embrace all the knowledge there is and everything else and we'll flourish.
Yeah.
Well, a certain amount of that does happen. In fact, an amazing amount of it happens. When I think about when I met you, my tools as a writer were a typewriter, a telephone, and a library card. Of course, thanks to you, there were better tools, but what I carry in my pocket...
Somebody over here had a lot to do with it, too.
Yes, he did. I mean, it's interesting what part vision plays, because I agree with you, Ted, that, Jacques Ellul called it technique. You called it packaging, but it does tend to take things over and colonize.
It? What's it?
Technology.
It is, what Ellul called technique was the efficient way of doing something.
Yeah, well, that's the French point of view. That there's as far as I was concerned, the Ellul vision of the future was very technocratic, very high French educational group, but they didn't understand it any more than the MIT people did.
So, I'm writing another book, and I want to tell young people what they ought to know.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think, Ted? What would you say? The young person just getting online, they're getting their little camera phone, they're getting their internet connection, their Facebook page, all that stuff.
Don't believe what you hear. That's my main message.
Oh, that's a good one.
I mean, if they hear that, they're not supposed to believe it?
Well, that's a good point. So start questioning with me. But the more recent the news, the more likely it is to be bullshit. My favorite slogan is the Russian motto: "В известие правда нет, и в правде известия нет." In the news there is no truth, and in the truth there is no news.
Well, I like that. I'm going to adopt that. I'll give you another.
That was in computer lib.
I'll give you a quote, which is Ernest Hemingway said, "What every good journalist needs is a foolproof internal crap detector."
Yep.
How do you develop that? How do you know what source to trust and what source not to trust?
There is no rule except
Well, but
your
he's seen you. Okay, so
internal
it's the luck of having an internal.
I don't think it's luck. I think that it's practice. But I think what Ted said is a good starting point. You have to think like a detective and question what you're told. Question authority is a kind of a bumper sticker.
Yep.
But when you're dealing with, I actually think that we have so much more available to us now than in the days when knowledge was in libraries.
Of course we do, but who
But
uses it?
But it's
There's too
mixed
much.
up with a whole bunch of crap.
Exactly. I am personally right now researching Lyme disease because I've had it now twice, last summer and this summer. And the amount of contradictory information, and for example, just 2 hours ago I was at Kaiser with the infectious disease doctor, and I showed him on a printed page Kaiser's position on Lyme disease, and he said, "Oh, that's boilerplate. Oh, I haven't even looked at that. Oh, ignore that." I'm going, "Hello?
Hello.
I'm a patient trying to research. Kaiser's my
So what about
sources."
the internet Lyme disease community?
There are hundreds of websites, and of course the doctors all say, "Oh, don't pay attention to that garbage." They say, "Read what the CDC says." And
So there's a place in between there. There's an organization called Health on the Net that helps you try to determine which of those websites are legit and which are not legit. But back to the question of how do you do the crap detection?
How do you trust health on the net?
I think, well, there's a certain amount of authority there. They're taking on some liability by claiming to do that, but of course anybody can.
I just don't know who to trust in my particular research. I don't know who to trust.
Well, so one of the things that I'm telling students is you need to build a kind of personal network of people you trust about things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
turn to them among the sources, because the journalists say you should triangulate. You should have three different sources.
Absolutely.
What?
Triangulate.
Never heard of that.
Three different
It's a
sources for
term
any
from
story.
artillery.
For any,
If you-
any
story.
question you have, I think you should.
How do you
If you have
identify?
a question for the IRS, you should call it.
Well, okay, so
Yeah.
first of all, you ought to know who your source is. So one of the things I told my daughter when she started using the web for research was, who's the author of this page? And if there's not an author, there's a utility called Whois that lets you find out who's responsible for that page. But
Oh, really?
back in the old days, authors had authority. Nowadays, anybody can be
I
an
know.
author. So
Yeah.
then you go search on the author's name and see what people say about them. So there's kind of a social aspect to this. Things have changed quite a bit, but when you started thinking about things, people didn't even have a framework for thinking about it. So you had to write one, right?
God, you're right. You're right.
I've been thinking about your ideas for a long time, Doug. Maybe more than you do.
Yeah,
Very possibly. These days.
have I sort of left them behind?
Because
That's
other people are.
my ambition is to live long enough to leave my ideas behind.
Better decisions to live better in the world. Ted, individually, Doug,
Oh no, you're.
in groups. But it's the same goal.
There's
The
a lot
goal
more.
is empowerment
And to make a better world.
and
Well,
improvement.
do you think that despite the design flaws of the personal computer and the web, that it is a better world than it was before it happened?
No.
Okay. What do you think, Doug? Things improved in your view?
They've certainly evolved, and who's to try to say whether that's bad or good? I don't.
I am.
Well, that's a good point. When you talk about evolution, you talk about the fitness for a particular environment.
Yeah,